You're listening to The Grind, well-caffeinated conversations with disc golfers who are passionate about improving their games and helping others to do the same. Welcome to episode 4 of The Grind, a disc golf podcast. I'm Josiah, and with me, my good buddy David, and we're going to talk some disc golf.
How's it going, guys?
I'm excited about this episode. We are going to review the Innova Teebird3. We are going to talk a pro tip from a 1034 rated player, and we're going to talk coffee. So, David, as always, what are you sipping on, and how was your week?
Oh, man, we're sipping on some coffee from Sugar Creek Coffee Roasters out in the Charlotte area. We got the Nail on the Head cup today. Man, tasting pretty tasty. I think we got I'm not sure what the percentage is, but it's a blend. Got a Guatemala Huehue Tinago, and it's washed. Actually, Guatemala Huehue Tinago. I don't know if Josiah knows. This is actually my favorite coffee region. I didn't know that. I call it Huehue. It's a little nickname in the industry, and it's blended with Ethiopia Limu, and it's a natural coffee. We'll get into it a little bit. Natural coffees are actually unique because typically when you get the coffee bean, you're pitting the coffee, and then you're washing it, and then you're drying it from the cherry. Natural coffees, you're actually drying it with the cherry on it, and so it's going to absorb a lot of the fruit from the cherry, and what happens is it ends up getting a lot of fruity berry note taste. And with this, you're definitely pulling a lot of blueberries out of it, which is pretty common for the Ethiopia region. And man, this is a tasty cup. Pretty well balanced with some chocolate notes and blueberry. It's fun, man.
Yeah, it's really good. I feel like you get the blueberry on the nose, and then that chocolate kind of lingers. It's really tasty. Big thanks to Sugar Creek for sending us coffee. They just kind of reached out to us and said, hey, we'd like to send you some coffee. They're also big supporters of the Charlotte disc golf scene. So Charlotte is becoming the new hub for disc golf, it seems, and Sugar Creek is supporting that scene, so that's pretty cool.
This is definitely a coffee that I would recommend to people to snag. As far as for me, my epiphany bean was actually from this similar area, Ethiopia Sidama, which is in that similar Limu area. It's when people talk about tasting notes in coffee, a lot of times you're like, okay. But this is when you're tasting something from a region like this, and like that's one of the first like legit tasting notes that I feel like is easy for the palate to pick up. And so I call it my epiphany bean because it was that for hitting the blueberry notes were really that first time my palate was like, oh my gosh, you can actually taste something in this.
Yeah, I think coffee for me went, okay, it's really bitter, but I kind of like it. I'm going to add a lot of cream and sugar to, I tried like some local roasted coffee and it wasn't that bitter. And I was like, I didn't know coffee could be like sweet and flavorful without a lot of milk and sugar. And then it went to, I can actually pick up a little bit of the differences between, let's say, a coffee that's in, from an African country or a Central American country. I don't think that I'm a coffee connoisseur, but I certainly enjoy when you can really pick it up pretty obviously, and this coffee definitely does that for me.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, David, how was your disc golf week?
Disc golf week was pretty good. Let's see. I think I got 3 rounds in this week, all Watson. And Watson's still in mostly those short placements. I think we had one of them switch to longer placement, but it's still 350-foot backhand shot, so it's not terrible. Definitely.
Yeah, right now you're looking at 350 and under on almost all the holes.
Yeah,
so it's really attackable right now. And nice weather. It's like 50 degrees outside.
It's been ridiculous this week. T-shirt weather for sure. I think all 3 rounds were about average for me. To be honest with you, I struggled a bit on putting this week. I wasn't committing to my 20-footers like I feel like I had been in a rhythm with. I had a round today, and for some reason, my jump putts and my putts outside of 30 feet, I was committing to those, and I think I cashed 4 of those today, which felt really good. But missing those 20-footers really beat me up. I think I missed 3 of the 20-foot putts today. That really messed up my score. But I was sitting, I think, shot -6, -9, and -7, somewhere in that range. So I've been fairly consistent, but definitely wish I need to get back into committing on my putts. I've been frustrated with that this week.
No, I hear that for sure. I think disc golf is just so funny. You finally get one area of your game figured out, or it feels like it, and then your other area of it falls apart. You know, it's like, hey, my drive is great, but I can't make a 15-footer, or hey, I'm making a lot of circle two putts, but I'm having to take them because my drive's a mess, or maybe your upshots are landing right under the basket, but whatever. Something else is falling apart, and we'll talk about that a little bit later because I think it's been a theme of this week for me, but. It's a fun game in that way, but it's also frustrating.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's just a little metaphor for life too. I think we try to find a balance and try to put energy into something that we're not necessarily as a strength, and we start to get better at it, but it's at the expense of kind of losing sight and interest or strength in another area.
Yeah, no, I feel that. And David, I thank you for another metaphor.
I'm all about the metaphors, man.
No, I like it. My week was good. I also played Watson 3 times. I don't think we played together at all, though, right?
Dude, I don't think we played together all week. You're right.
That's so funny. The weather's just been too good to not sneak out and get a few rounds in. I went 11 down, 10 down, 10 down. So I was super happy about that consistency. It's funny because last week I went par at Watson, same layout. So it just kind of shows you, I mean, that's like a typical AM 2-round stretch, right? Par and then 11 down.
Typical.
But my backhand's feeling good. My putts are feeling okay. Not as good as they were earlier this year, but still feeling pretty good. And I'm pretty happy. I think one of the things this podcast is doing for me is as we're having these conversations and I'm thinking about the podcast, I'm starting to say the things that I know I should do, I start to feel like maybe a little bit more inclined to apply them, if nothing else, then because we're going to talk about it the next week. So I think that a little bit of accountability or whatever you want to call it is helping. And the big thing I've been doing is just really focusing, like we've been talking about really in some part the last few weeks, but especially last week, focusing on each shot being its own thing. And so really trying to let go of a good drive or a bad drive, or a good upshot or a bad upshot, or a good putt or a bad putt. And I think that's one of the reasons that I've been really consistent this week. And realistically, my last 7 rounds, I had 1 par, and then it's 14 down, 12 down, 11 down, 11 down, 10 down, 10 down, or something like that. So I feel like that feels really good. And I think a lot of it is not just that I'm hitting on all cylinders, because sometimes the drive's not quite where I need it to be, or sometimes the putt isn't. But I think I'm not letting mistakes or an area of my game that's frustrating take over my whole round. And no wind and easy course positions is a big help as well.
The no wind has been nice. I think the talking about it, I think it keeps you accountable with your friends. And it's the same way of like, I'll talk through shots that I did well, the mistakes that I made while we're playing with friends, because I feel like it keeps me accountable for when the next hole happens. If I am saying, hey, I'm not committing to my 20-foot putts, I step up and I have a 20-foot putt again, I'm okay. I just had that conversation about it. I'm going to commit this time. I don't care if I blast past the basket. I need to not make that same mistake. I need to make some sort of adjustment.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, you want to move into the pro tip?
Let's do it.
Time for our How Did You Do That pro tip. This time we've got James Proctor, who's a 1034 rated MPO player. He's got a full-time job, and he still crushes, which is kind of my dream, like, hey, I probably need to keep the full-time job, but I'd love to be 1034 rated and still have a day job. If you want to see backhand form in beauty, check out James Proctor's form. It's amazing, and I think it really is something that we can all learn from. Anyway, I asked him, hey, James, what's one thing you wish you knew when you were first building your game? And what he said was, I wish I had developed my forehand earlier. For my first couple years as a pro, I was almost exclusively backhand. And I think that this is just such a good topic because I think when you talk about forehand, backhand, Dave and I are complete opposite. If I can throw backhand the whole round and not throw a forehand, I'm fine with that. And David, you're the opposite, right?
Yep, complete opposite. That's why I think Josiah and I are perfect doubles partners.
Yeah, that's the dream. I think most of the time our friends don't want that to happen, and we don't play that much doubles, but I'd love to play like a doubles tournament with you, because I think between my spin putt and your more push putt that's a little safer, and my backhand and your forehand, I think we might crush.
Yeah, I think definitely have a solid shot. I think this goes both ways. I mean, somebody that's relying on backhand at the beginning and wishing that you would have learned the forehand earlier on. I think the same thing for me. I mean, was exclusively forehand for probably the first year because I could only throw 200 feet backhand because I had atrocious backhand form, had no concepts. I think if I would have worked on actually understanding the concepts of good form backhand early on, I'd be a lot further along than I am now.
Yeah, I think it's so hard. And this is something that, if you guys heard the last episode or episode 2, I talked a little bit about the slump I had recently, and that was basically 8 months of terrible disc golf for me. And not terrible in the grand scheme of things, but when you're improving, your game's getting better and better and better, and then all of a sudden it just drops off, and some part or a lot of parts of your game, in this case, most of my game, just feels like it took, 3 or 4 steps back. It's pretty frustrating. And the one good side of that was that my backhand form was such a mess, and I no longer could trust it in terms of accuracy, and I couldn't trust it to get the distance I wanted. I started to rely on my forehand for distance, and then when I saw, hey, I actually have a decent forehand, it's not great, but I can pump it out there like 325, 350 pretty easily. Occasionally I'll get one that I accidentally throw further than that, and I have enough consistency to make it work. I started to really hone in on that forehand. Not that I ever got to the point like that you're at, David, with your forehand in terms of the accuracy or reliability, but I started to get a decent forehand. So I really am glad about that. On the flip side, the thing that got me out of the slump was my brother really just saying like, hey dude, you're forcing a forehand and you've got a great backhand. Just like do what you're good at. And I think honestly that when he said that, I was like, you know what? He's right. I've learned the forehand a bit, but I'm not going to be a forehand dominant player, and I'm handicapping myself by not figuring out these backhand issues. And so I just worked on it, figured it out, slowed down, like we were talking about in episode 2, I think as well. Slowed down to putters and mids, did a lot of putter rounds, worked on a lot of things to try to get back to where I was. And I actually feel like my backhand's better than it's ever been. But it's this push and pull, I feel. What do you think, David?
Yeah, I mean, there's a balance. I think that push and pull, like you said, because there's that balance of relying on your strengths, like we've talked about before. But you have to, at the same time, be practicing those weaknesses so you can, if necessary, if that's your only option for a shot, you have to give yourself a shot. You have to. You can't just go to it and have never done that shot before because you're afraid of making that shot. Then you're not. There's no way you're going to land that shot in a tournament. Or whether it's just a casual round with friends or whatever it might be. So I think you have to force yourself, whether it is learning the forehand early on or whether it is learning the backhand early on, whichever one you're relying on. I definitely think that it's okay to have one that you're relying on predominantly. I think that's pretty much every player in the game.
Yeah, I think James Conrad and Sarah Hokum are kind of the extremes of that, where they say, I figured out how to make my backhand replicate a forehand in 98% of the cases, and so, or vice versa for Sarah Hokum. And so I think there are pros who obviously succeed at a high level, but you are sometimes at a significant disadvantage because you're having to throw a shot that is an order of magnitude or two greater in difficulty and complexity in order to make the shape that the forehand or backhand makes naturally.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's a balance. At the end of the day, find the one that feels most comfortable for you, but at the same time, be willing to work on those shots. Because if you're not willing to work on those shots, you're probably not going to get better. But at the end of the day, if that's not what you enjoy, if you enjoy just going out and throwing the same shot every day, by all means. If at the end of the day it's not enjoyable to you to learn those different shots, again, going back to it is about having fun. But I think part of having fun with disc golf is learning what you can do with the disc.
Yeah, and I think there's so many layers to that. I also think that sometimes the throw that's most natural to you early on may not be the throw that you hone in on the best later. So think about your brother John, and he was all forehand like you, maybe even more extreme in some cases. And lately, his backhand has started to really round into shape. He's really crushing it, and so it's just kind of fun to see. And I think Micah was the same way, forehands and overhands. Now he basically is killing it on the backhand. And so I do think there is some level, like you were saying, hey, start early, just trying it. Like maybe on second shots, maybe just you're practicing, maybe you're just doing it in your yard if you got a big yard or a net or something, but just trying it. Don't injure yourself, be careful. But I think it's great to at least experiment.
Yeah, I think it was cool seeing John because I think early on, both him and I had the issue of no distance with backhand. But once we both at around the same time made the adjustment of being able to actually unlock our hips to use our hips by our footing, he got some serious power when he started to mess around with backhand. And the only reason why he started doing that was because he started turning over his forehand with this wraith so much. So he's like, I'm going to try backhand. And suddenly I think he has the most power of all of us now with his backhand because he goes up there and he explodes. It's almost frustrating how well he explodes using his hips.
Yeah. Talk about, you say it's frustrating. I'm supposed to be the friend, besides Ryan Wilking, our pro friend. I'm supposed to be the friend with a good backhand, and then every once in a while, John will just crush one, and I'm like, yeah, that's annoying. Anyway, I was talking more to James Proctor, who gave us the tip about this whole, hey, he wished he would have developed the forehand earlier, which makes sense. But I said, hey, what's the balance there? I mean, it seems like on one level, if you try to focus on everything, you won't ever get great at anything, especially if you're like James Proctor and you got a full-time job and you got limited time. And what he said was, it's definitely a tricky balance, but it's definitely important to not have any weaknesses if possible. And maybe that's where I want to be with my forehand personally, is I want to be great at the backhand, but I don't want to have a place where I force a backhand to a forehand shape because I feel like my forehand's a weakness. I'd rather say like my forehand it's not 1A and 1B, it's like 1 and 2, but I'm confident in it. And I think about Palisade, one of the courses that we play a lot. It's got a few holes that have a lot of trees and a ditch left, and the hole slopes to the left. And so when you throw backhands on those holes, if you have a tree kick or if you have a skip, you're going to go OB almost all the time. And the forehand, because it spins the opposite direction and it fades the opposite direction, you're much more likely to stay in bounds. And I think it's just something simple. Like if I throw forehands on those holes, I'm much less likely to bogey. I may be less likely to birdie as well, but a lot of those holes are tough anyway. And so having a forehand that I feel confident that's going to give me a possibility to birdie and is going to decrease significantly my bogey potential, I think is huge.
Mm-hmm. That just reminded me of something that Nate Saxon would say, is the pro makes the highest percentage shot. And what you're saying with Palisade is being able to go to your forehand when you know that gives you the highest percentage of whether it is making it around the trees or whether it is just staying in bounds. Your highest percentage of being able to get a par or a birdie, whatever it might be that you're going for on that hole. I think that's huge, and that's the balance of whether it's relying on the backhand or relying on the forehand or being able to have the balance to transitioning to one or the other, is being able to evaluate those percentages and execute based off and feeling good about executing the forehand in that scenario and executing the backhand and vice versa, a different scenario.
Yeah, and I think that there's some balance because you also have to say, hey, what's the highest percentage shot for me based on what's working in my game right now? And that may be different for different players. So David and I may look at the same hole, and I know that the backhand gap's a little tighter than the forehand gap, but I'm much more likely to birdie the backhand than the forehand, or whatever that is. I think there is some room to say my forehand is fine, or I'm confident in my forehand, but I'm even more confident in my backhand, or vice versa.
Yeah, one hole that actually John and I were both talking about this today when we were playing our round that I think about is hole 10 at Watson in its long placement. It's a 350-foot backhand shot right now, and it's pretty much a completely open backhand shot. And it's, if you're throwing a wraith or whatever it might be, you kind of want to throw something like a wraith, something that's overstable to skip back up into it. It's a pretty easy, you're throwing it just dead straight and it's going to skip up there for you. Early on in playing, I had no backhand, and I was doing everything I can to get this crazy flex turnover forehand to get around the trees. And 1 out of 100 times I landed that shot. I think I birdied it one time doing that.
You're talking about hole 9, right?
Hole 9, sorry.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
I just
hole
wanted to
9.
make sure we're on the same
Yeah.
page. I was like, I don't think that's hole 10. No,
You're
sorry.
right. Hole
To our
9.
listeners who don't really care about which hole we're talking about, I
Yeah.
apologize, but I just wanted to be in step.
Hole 9. But it's laughable at this point of like how early on you're so reliant on the forehand that you're not even willing to take. That's an easy shot. A 350-foot backhand just throwing it dead straight.
Well, it's easier than throwing a forehand into a grove of trees on a flex and hoping against hope that you won't end up OB left and won't get caught up in the trees.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's laughable looking back because literally I was just hoping. I was hoping for the best outcome when I knew that the possible outcome of it landing there was maybe 1%. And I still was making the shot and not willing to make the adjustment of trying to learn backhand.
And I think that this is kind of your natural tendency, and anybody's, I think, but especially for you, you really want to play within your game and within your strengths and what you're competent in. But I think somebody once said, I don't remember who it was, but they said something like, you should throw the shot that the pros would throw. You should throw the shot that you wish you would throw. And I do think that that is something that I sometimes try to think about is, okay, I don't have the shot yet. But if I never try it, I'm never going to build it.
Yeah, we're talking about casual rounds, right? Not tournament round.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I mean, if you want to practice during a tournament that way, be my guest, because I wouldn't mind taking a few strokes on you that way.
Hey, you never know. I might unlock that 375-foot forehand hyzer, and then you'll be in trouble.
Yeah.
Well, I think we should move on to our discussion topic of the day. We are lucky enough to have a coffee pro in David on the show, and we've been talking coffee a lot at the beginning of the shows, and I thought for those who came here for disc golf and ended up with some coffee talk, and maybe you're interested in leveling up your coffee game while you're leveling up your disc golf game, I just thought if you like coffee, but you would like to learn more about what's a good way to brew coffee, what's a good way to find decent beans, or maybe even a step back from that, hey, I don't really love coffee. Maybe you would enjoy coffee if you had the right brew method or the right beans. So David, for somebody just getting started in coffee, what are the different brew methods that people typically use, and what do you like?
Yeah, for sure. I think mostly what people are used to at home is your typical coffee pot or a Keurig coffee, I think is what people are seeing mostly in offices and whatnot now because they're just easy, making one cup at a time, and you don't have to do anything yourself. One of the more popular methods within the coffee industry, I think as you get a little bit more into the nerdy scene, as far as you being able to control your cup, we're talking, there's kind of three different, I guess, popular areas. One of them is the French press, one's the pour over, and the other one would be the AeroPress right now. And I'm sure some of you are familiar.
When you're saying control your cup,
yeah,
what do you mean by that?
Control your cup as far as, so when it comes to the Keurig, for instance, or your traditional coffee pot, all of those parts are made with plastic. And because they're made with plastic, the temperature that you're getting up to is not necessarily going to be at the temperature that is the most appropriate to be brewing your coffee. So naturally, your coffee is going to be a little bit more bitter, or it's going to come out tasting a little bit more bitter, I'd say. And at times, if it was a lighter roast, it might come out tasting a little bit more sour. That's one of the variables. The other variable is with Keurig or coffee pot. It's not going to be as consistent with going over all of the grounds, the coffee grounds. So for instance, in a coffee pot, you're going to have your typical sprayer going down. If your coffee grounds are not well distributed, there's going to be pockets that are not really getting much water. The water's going to be pushed into different areas. And so the coffee is going to come out just unevenly extracted is the terminology that's used. And so I think one of the most popular right now in the industry is the pour over method, which is actually what we're drinking right now. Is Josiah made a pour over. I think you use a Kalita, right, Josiah?
Yeah, a Kalita Wave is what it's called. Yeah. Is the dripper.
So the two most popular pour overs right now are the Kalita Wave, which Josiah uses one, and the V60 made by Hario. And there's also, the Chemex would also be considered a pour over method, but the Chemex I'm going to kind of toss out because it's typically people are brewing that for more than one person when you're brewing a Chemex, which is a great method, similar technology, just not necessarily as what I'll be talking about specifically. But the Kalita Wave is really popular because it's metal, which is great for if you want to bring it camping, backpacking, and also for home. It also has a really kind of sexy look to it, and just nice, clean metal look with, I think it has a little brown handle.
You know, it's just like discs. It's like, hey, this disc flies well, but there's another disc that flies almost as good, but it looks cooler. I'm probably going to bag the second one.
Yeah, and you're not going to break it. But the Kalita Wave, it has a flat bottom versus the V60 typically is either glass or ceramic, and it has more of a coned bottom with a big hole opening at the bottom.
So just to take a step back, for a dripper in general, for pour over, apologies if you're a pour over expert listening to this, but it's just really a cone with some kind of narrowing of an opening, and you typically will have a filter that you put in there, and then you put ground beans in, and then you pour water over a kettle at your own kind of, as you have control over that. So what you were saying, if I'm catching it right, is that, hey, the Kalita Wave is got a flat bottom, and then the V60 it's more of an open bottom. Is that right?
Yep, and more of a cone shaped. And kind of the different philosophies with those, they both are seen as very great brewing methods, and you'll see both of them interchangeably in coffee shops. I think the coffee shop that I work at is going to be using the V60s, and then one of our buddy coffee shops in town uses the Kalita Wave. The Kalita Wave is kind of arguably the most consistent as far as foolproof goes.
That's why I've got it.
So it's, in other words, it's harder to mess up your cup. You're going to get a more consistent cup if you're an amateur. So just in the same way with playing disc golf, you want to throw more discs that are going to be give you less room or margin for air.
The Kalita Wave is like the buzz.
There you go. That's perfect.
Pour over.
That's perfect. And then you got the V60, which the V60 would be considered more of a precision method. In theory, you can argue that you might end up with a better outcome with it, but it's going to be less consistent than the Kalita Wave.
And for me, as not a coffee pro, I think that's why I really like the Wave, is I don't have any complaints from my wife in the morning. Well, I sometimes do, but she's generally pretty happy with the coffee because I'm not screwing it up. And I think really early on when I was just figuring it out, I think that my coffee, because you have control, you also have more potential for error and more potential for inconsistency because there's now a human involved instead of just plastic and metal parts moving and a little bit of water sprayer. And so I do think that is one reason I really like the Wave, is I get a consistent cup every time. And once I've got it kind of dialed in terms of how I want to brew it, then I don't have to really worry about ending up with like a really sour or really bitter cup, over under extracted, to use coffee terminology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And so I guess you can argue superiority over both of those versions of the pour.
Well, I do think, based on, the limited coffee knowledge I have, if you're a superior brewer of coffee, then the Haria V60 makes sense. Mm-hmm. And if you're inferior like me, maybe this is like my forehand, I don't know, but just something easy.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, I mean, one of my favorite quotes is a guy that actually built our espresso machine. It's just coffee. It's a lot of fun to get the best cup and to have that experience. But at the end of the day, you have to remind yourself that it is just coffee. And that's just part of enjoying the process.
So if you were just getting into pour over, or you had somebody you knew who was getting into pour over, what would be like, hey, I don't want to spend a lot of money, but I kind of want to try this? What would be your brewer, and then would you need anything else just to get started?
Yeah, I mean, as far as a starter kit, I definitely would enjoy, I would encourage the Kalita Wave is a great way to start. Again, talking about being foolproof. And also you can take that camping and brew for your buddies, and it's interchangeable to use at home and camping. I wouldn't want to bring the V60 with me camping because, again, it's going to be either ceramic or glass, and you don't want to bring that with you. The only other thing that I recommend to get probably is you're going to want to get a gooseneck kettle, and probably your cheapest entry level is going to be your Hario gooseneck kettle, and whether it's a stovetop or whether it's a electric heated one, they're both great.
I really like the Hario stovetop one for sure, and I can't give another brand recommendation because I'm blanking on it, but there's a lot of good options out there. The gooseneck kettle really just allows you to have a little bit more precision in your pour, right?
Yep, exactly. It's just precision in your pour, so you're consistently hitting all of the grounds in the as you're pouring over the coffee, because really that's the goal. That's why it's such a great method, is that consistency. And when it comes to, I mean, talking about superior gooseneck kettles, Fellow is becoming quickly the leader in the industry as far as at-home brewing goes, and they make a kettle that's absolutely fantastic. You're paying for it. I think they get pretty pricey, but they look really pretty. I'm staring at Josiah's in his house right now. They look really pretty sitting on the counter. And it's a great experience. You can control your temperature with it. It's pretty great.
Yeah, I would definitely not start with one unless you're just insane and you want to jump in. I would start with the cheapest thing you can find that's going to make decent coffee, and I think any gooseneck kettle is going to be better than pouring it from just a typical kettle that doesn't have that precision pouring. And then I think any dripper setup, pour dripper setup is going to be worth trying. I know Bee House, I think it's called, has one that I liked, especially early on, but I do think the Cleta Wave is a good way to go. The one other thing I want to talk about, I don't want to belabor coffee too much for the folks that don't like it or are not into this conversation, but the method is important, but the beans are also important. If you said, hey, my palate isn't, super fancy coffee at this point, but I just want to kind of dip my toes into the different types of beans and flavors I could get from them, where would somebody go to figure that out, find that out?
I think finding a local roaster in the area. I think depending on what you're looking for, communicate to the roaster. The roaster obviously is the one putting together what he's hoping to craft different flavor profiles. I think just asking questions and not being afraid of sounding like you don't know what you're talking about, because the reality is that and there's a lot of people that will act like they know what they're talking about, and they just like to talk. It's fun as a barista or a roaster to just enjoy the conversation and the discovery aspect. I think that's some of my favorite experiences as a barista, is being able to talk through the experience of the cup with somebody. And so I think really, look for a local roaster. You could find a coffee shop in town, just start asking your barista some questions. I think that's a good starting point, rather than going to the grocery store and snagging a bag of our favorite Green Mermaid or whatever it might be. I think finding a place that is putting a little bit more intentionality, as opposed to just trying to mass produce ground coffee that is not even whole bean.
You can hear the pretentiousness there. Anyway, and I just recommend, maybe even before you buy anything, if you want to, just go to your local coffee shop that's got a pour over bar and, try some different beans. Tell the barista, hey, I like more chocolatey, more nutty, more fruity kind of flavor notes. And then they'll probably have a recommendation for a bean, and they'll make you pour over. You can watch them do it. You can get a sense of this. And then the internet is your friend. If you ever, there's, like anything, there's more opinions than there are people, but there are also a lot of good resources out there.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, we'll move on past the coffee talk for a bit and move into our What Was That disc review. And this week we've got the Teebird3, which is from Innova, and it's an 8-speed, 4-glide, 0-turn, and 2-fade fairway. And David, I have thoughts, but I want to hear your thoughts first.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting when I was thinking about, because I've thrown in and out with the Teebird3 for a while, and when my backhand form was very poor and I was reaching back really far and ripping through, this was a disc.
So like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, like 2 weeks ago. When I was pulling through really hard and snapping on it, I was getting it to go straight for a long period of time.
It was so straight, ridiculous. I was like, I didn't know Teebird3s did that.
Almost like a more understable disc, like what you would expect a Saint to do, which I actually have a Saint in my bag.
Yeah, I bought Teebird3s after watching you throw them. I was like, if he can do it, I should be able to do it.
But then when I changed my form up, I noticed a difference in the way that it was coming out of my hand, and it actually came out more overstable. And so I think I didn't realize the stability that I had with the Teebird3, because I definitely am getting more skip with it now at the end, more finish, and I'm also not able to get it to go as straight longer. I'm having to throw a little bit more on an Anheuser in order to get it to do what I want. And in that, I'm thinking about hole 10 at
The
Watson,
actual
the
Holton,
actual Holton at Watson, yeah,
which is basically a shot that OB left. I think Mando left and right. You've got to keep the shot pretty straight,
dead
and
straight.
and if you fade out too early, you miss the Mando and go OB. If you turn it over too much, you're going to hit an early tree or miss the other Mando. So it's one of the more demanding shots in the valley.
So I used to hit that shot 8 out of 10 times with the T-Bird 3. And now with the T-Bird 3, it's pretty difficult for me to hit it because of that stability. It definitely pushes left earlier than I want. And so I'm having to go more understable.
Well, let's just, for everybody who's listening, arm speeds are going to vary, and how you release the disc is going to vary. David's is varying every day pretty much as he's cleaning up his backhand form. You're getting good power, and you're getting a nice clean result. But we're typically backhand and forehand really like 350-ish throwers, sometimes more than that. And we play at 4,500 feet elevation, so discs are going to be maybe a little bit more stable for us than a similar thrower at sea level. So if you throw maybe further than us or live at sea level, you may see a little bit less stability than we talk about. And if it's the opposite, you throw at higher elevation, which would mean you're living on top of a mountain or something, or you have a little less power, then you're going to see a little bit more stability. So do you think it matches those flight numbers now based on your new form or your cleaned up form in terms of that no turn, but you get some fade?
Yeah, I think it definitely matches a lot more now. I think before I saw it more as similar to my Saint, but not as glidey as my Saint, I guess, is how I viewed it. It definitely fits a lot more of what I expect the disc to do rather than what I was forcing it to do, I guess, beforehand. And typically what I'm averaging probably around 340 to 350 with it on a backhand if I'm in a complete open, if I have a complete open shot. I think one time, at Palisade, I landed like a 375. I had to have had a tailwind or something going on the way that it carried. I don't know.
It was a throw when you were working on your form. I was like, oh no, I'm in trouble. That looked like he put nothing on it and it went far.
Yeah. But that's not typical. Typically I'm hitting that 340 to 350 range. I love the grip, the hand feel. It's a little bit of a shorter rim to it. And so it's easier to get that grip that you want that's just underneath the index finger knuckle gripping.
Yeah, it's definitely got a fairway rim to it. It's definitely not quite as wide rimmed as like a Wraith or something like that.
It just feels natural and comfortable.
I like the backhand feel for sure.
Yeah, it's a good starting point, I think, with if you're learning backhand. I think it is a great disc for learning backhand because it has that stability that gives you a little bit of flexibility for making mistakes. It's not going to exploit your weaknesses, I guess, early on, but it's something that can be reliable for you if you are playing tournaments or if you are wanting to score well. I think it's something that can definitely be reliable for you.
Yeah, I think it is a good disc in terms of it. I would say, the Crave that we talked about last week is neutral. By that I mean, if you throw it flat, it's going to, for, at least for our arm speed, and you throw it cleanly, it's going to end up more or less with a little turn, a little fade about where you aimed. And the T-Bird 3, it's a little faster, it's a little bit more stable. So I'd call it not overstable. I just call it stable, meaning it's going to go straight for a while and then it's going to fade. I think the beginner, to me, it would depend on how much athleticism that person had. Like, I'd have a hard time handing this to a low arm speed player and saying figure it out, because I think it's going to force them to throw a big ante. And I think I'd rather them be able to release something flat and gets a little bit more distance. But if somebody was pretty athletic and had another option to kind of work on that flat shot, to work on that baby ante, or that have something that's a little bit more predictable, I do think would be good.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think that this is kind of like a great beginner disc early on in playing, as far as if you're normally throwing something like a Crave, what we talked about last week, if you're wanting to disc up a little bit because it's getting a little bit of a headwind going on, this might be a disc that you can transition to that feels fairly similar, but you're going to get a little bit more of that stability to fight that headwind.
Yeah, I think before you run off to do, David's favorite flat top Firebird or
always
a Destroyer, something really fast, I do think this makes sense as that first disc that really can handle torque without turning over and has that reliable fade. I think it's definitely much more approachable than, let's say, a brand new Thunderbird or a brand new Firebird or a brand new Destroyer or something like that. I do think that makes sense.
For sure. And I would agree. I mean, I think it's in that same line with bird discs with Innova, and it is kind of that it's a stepping stone to the Thunderbird, which is a stepping stone to the Firebird. And I think even with, I think you're holding a Anthony Brilla Glow, that to me has more of the stability like a Thunderbird. It definitely is going to be fighting a bit more.
I think too, the hard thing about Innova discs, and I think disc in general, is that what they start out at that first throw and what they're like after you've had some time with them are so different that I do think sometimes if you get a brand new, the used bin is your friend, I think, a lot of times, because if you get a brand new disc, it's going to start out really stable. And I think this one did for me. But I do think once you get a little bit of wear, you do get maybe a little bit more mellow flight than it starts out with. It started out a bit like a meat hook for me. I like the feel backhand as well. I think it fits my hand nicely. I like that I can mash on it on a flat angle and know that I'm not going to get any turn, or if I'm going to get any turn, it's going to be because of, I rolled my wrist or I accidentally gave it a little ante. It's still going to be reliable in terms it's going to hold that mostly straight flight and fade. I think it holds up pretty well in the headwind. I didn't get a chance to throw it in any gale force winds because we've had fantastic weather. But I've been throwing them on and off for the last few months, and I think it would hold up well to, a mild headwind or medium headwind. I like it a lot backhand. I'd say I don't get quite as far as you do, but I'm probably in that 330 range, 320 range. I feel like it's pretty reliable for me to get there. And I like that it doesn't have so much glide that you're worried about, hey, is it going to do something, strange? Glide is great most of the time, but for control, sometimes too much glide is a problem. So I think that 4 is really accurate in terms of the glide.
Yeah, for sure. And this is a disc that I primarily would go to backhand.
Yeah, why don't you mess with it forehand that much?
Every once in a while, I'll throw it with a forehand. I think there was a while when hole 11 at Watson was in the longer position, and you needed kind of at least the line that I was wanting to take was kind of a straight shot with maybe just a little fade at the end. And I landed it a couple of times with the Teebird3. It's predictable enough to where if you do, it's almost like what an understable disc is for me backhand, the Teebird3 is for me forehand. If I'm doing a good job at having a clean release and snapping forward with it, I can have some good touchy shots with it, but I think it's also it's a disc forehand that I will naturally turn over. I guess it exploits that weakness for me when I'm relying too much on my flat top Firebird. That's when I'm going to turn something like the Teebird3 over very easily. But it is something that I think it's usable. I think it's definitely something that you can go to, but it's not something that's going to be predictable every single time for me with the forehand. I think that's part of why I don't go to it as often.
Yeah, I think that overstable disc, just, the forehand, you naturally can develop a lot more torque and off-axis torque, and it's a little harder to get a lot of spin on it. And so I do think it's natural to prefer an overstable disc. The pros, most of them do as well, for most forehand shots. But I occasionally have a forehand shot where I'm like, hey, the forehand fits this better, but I can't have that big fade or that big skip on the end. And that's one reason that I picked up the Teebird3 to try out myself was, one, because you were throwing it so stupid straight and far. And the second thing was that I had this thought of, if I could just, Crave is just it doesn't have enough early stability for me to trust on my forehand, but I'd like something that I could throw straight and put some power into it and not have that fade. And I do think the Teebird3 is a good disc for that. You can't roll your wrist over on the forehand or not give it spin. You are going to see it turn over. But I think it is less reliable than a flat top Firebird in terms of that early flight. But if you didn't want the fade, I think it might be a good disc.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think it's an option to think about, and it's something that you can work with. It's definitely not one that you would just toss out immediately with the forehand.
Yeah, I think it's kind of this disc that I don't think because it's not crazy glidey, it's not crazy overstable, it's not flippy. I think sometimes these sort of discs maybe get lost in the shuffle because You can get a little bit more distance or a little bit more fade, or you can put another disc on more ante or flip up or whatever that is. And this is kind of like that very middle of the road. It does pretty much what the flight numbers say, and it doesn't really do much more, but it also doesn't do anything less.
Yeah, for sure.
We have it here in a metal flake, which we will be giving away. You can follow us at thegrind.dg on Instagram, and you can win that. Just look for the post for this episode. And we've got this Barella Glow, and you normally throw champs, right?
Yeah, I think I have 2 champion Teebird3s from, I think they're actually Ricky Wysocki before he made the switch.
Okay. You've got one that you've really worn in your bag, and then, dang it.
You ruined it, dude.
I ruined it. Anyway, you have had one at one point in time in your bag that's a little bit more beat up, and then one that's a little bit fresher. Is that right?
Yeah, I have one that's a little bit more flippy.
But still pretty straight.
Yep.
Cool. I'd say that the metal flake for me was the most stable out of the box, and then the Barella. I didn't throw any other plastics. The Barella for me, I really liked it on a baby Anheuser. I think that's where I saw it really have a lot more distance than I expected. On that flat shot, it was really reliable, but when I got it on that baby Anheuser, I started to see it really cruise, not necessarily glide, but I think that 8 speed, you really see it as it kind of it picks up ground a little faster than some other fairways. I also really liked it when I've been playing with it for little precision spike hyzers, like 250 to 280. I really liked because it wasn't quite as much work as like getting a Firebird out on a spike hyzer, but I felt like it was pretty reliable. And so those are kind of the shots that I mostly enjoyed it on, is that straight to fade, reliable, fairway shot. And then the baby Annie, where you get a little bit of a flex, but really flexes back to flat, maybe a little fade. And then messed around with it a little bit on the forehand and enjoyed that. And also the precision hyzer. I think it did all those things well. I've thrown quite a few discs in the similar slot. Most brands are going to have a disc fairly similar to Teebird3, meaning that straight to fade, 7 or 8 speed fairway. But anyway, David, I think we're ready for your rating. So our rating system, 1 out of 5. And 1 is this disc just isn't that great. 2 is it's a fine disc, but there's definitely better options. 3 is it's a good disc, but it doesn't stand out. 4 is it's not going in my bag, but it's fantastic. And 5 is it's going in my bag. So David, what's your rating?
For sure. I'm going for a 5 here. I mean, you let the cat out of the bag a little early as far as being in my bag. But for me, the Teebird3 is the disc that I tend to go back to with my backhand when I feel like I'm starting to lose some touch, or if I'm trying to reach back and get a little extra on it, whatever it might be. I can go back to the Teebird3 every single time. And it's kind of a starting point for me to having, I love the grip feel. I don't feel like it's a heavy weight in my hand. I think both mine are around like 169, 170 in my bag. And it feels like it's just easy and effortless for me to throw them. The other backhand discs that I have in my bag, I'll end up throwing the Wraith, which if I begin to start making mistakes with my backhand, it's easy for me to hyzer out early with my Wraith or whatever it might be. But this is the disc that I always go back to with my backhand to find that clean release point for me. And I know it is a little more overstable, so it's a little more
until you start bagging
friendly.
The crave.
Yeah,
I know last week you didn't say you would, but I'm going to make it happen.
I know. I need to do something because again, that now that I've kind of fixed my form, I need to change up my game a little bit with my backhand. But this is a disc I love. I love going back to. It just feels good.
Yeah. Okay. So 5 for David. This has been in and out of my bag the last few months. I like it a lot. I think that I expected it to be a little straighter based on how you threw it than it is. I think that, fade, if you don't give it enough oomph, sometimes is a little earlier than I'd like. I naturally throw from a bit of hyzer, and so I think because it doesn't really have much turn, it doesn't really flip up for me. But I do think it's reliable. So I'm tempted to put it in the bag. I don't have it in the bag right now. I don't think I will anytime soon. I could see a world in which I might put it in for a specific round if I wanted a specific shot from it. But I'm going to give it a 4. I do think it's a really good disc. I do think that it's definitely something to consider, but I kind of think it's in between what I throw. I throw the Crave, but I also have the MVP servo and a resistor, and I think this is somewhere between the servo and the resistor. It's got much less flip than the servo, but it doesn't have quite as much of a hard finish as the resistor. And I bag a little lighter weight resistor, so I get a pretty straight shot until the end. The Teebird3 definitely has more distance potential, but if I need to step up to something past that 320, 330 range, I'm typically going to go to a 9 or 10 speed disc anyway. And so I think that 8 speed is just kind of a weird middle world for me because I've got options that will go a little shorter or a little further and do something similar. So for me, it's really not so much about the disc as much as a bit about my game. And then the last thing I'd say is I kind of like the fairway as a more of a touch disc, like it's step up from a mid range, but still requires a bit of touch. And I feel like the Teebird3 requires me to just throw a little too hard with an angle that I'm just a little less comfortable with in order to get that straight flight that I enjoy. So it's not going in my bag, but I definitely will give it a 4 because I think it's a solid disc.
Cool.
So that's a 9 out of 10, another solid review for us. We, once again, will be giving one of these away, a beautiful purple metal flake, so you can check that out. Anyway, that's the majority of our show, but David, just for fun, I got to ask, if you had to drink day-old Folgers every day for a year, and that's all you could drink for coffee, or only play disc golf with a Discmania tilt, which is a stupid overstable disc, which would you choose?
I think that's a ridiculously stupid overstable disc. I love the flat top Firebird. The tilt is on that's on steroids. That's tough, man. That's tough. I think if I played with a tilt for an entire year, my game would be pretty messed up by relying on solely the tilt. So that would be rough to come back from, but it would also be fun to learn that disc because it is you can do a lot of fun things with it. I got to go with drinking Folgers for a year, man, because I think that would strip that would strip a lot of joy out of my life for a year.
Disc golf is pretty important to you when you drink day-old Folgers every day in order to be able to throw your whole bag.
Yeah. Yeah, I think. No. I think I would go with throwing the tilt for.
You would.
I went backwards. Throwing the tilt for a year. Yeah.
You would just throw the tilt.
Yes, I would throw the tilt for a year.
Okay.
Sorry.
I think that makes sense. I would definitely drink day-old Folgers. There's no way that I would give up being able to throw anything but the tilt upside down or whatever it'd have to be in disc golf. I would just endure Folgers for sure if I could throw my whole bag.
I mean, really, for me, it would just be relishing at the end of the year, beating you with solely a tilt in my bag. That would be a really good feeling. And that's really what I'm going for.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thanks for listening. We want to give a special thank you to James Proctor for providing the pro tip and to Sugar Creek for providing the coffee. You can support James by buying his Metal Flake Max, which is kind of tilt-like. It's his tour series for this year, and if you need something that's even overstable for Eagle McMahon, then that's a good option. And then you can order Sugar Creek Coffee and support them. Also, give us a review on Apple Podcasts. We've had a few reviews that are 5 stars, and we're super grateful for those, but a few more reviews like that would help people find the show. Jeff Wu78 wrote, "Fantastic debut. This is quickly becoming one of my favorite podcasts about disc golf. Josiah and David are chill guys who I would like to hang out with and talk about getting better at disc golf." Thank you, Jeff. We want to hang out with you too and really appreciate the 5-star review. And as always, whether it's coffee or disc golf, this week, don't forget to enjoy the grind.